The greatest player alive knew this would be his final season, and it had nothing to do with age. Michael Jordan was 34, still unstoppable, still on top of the NBA. 5 championships, 4 MVPs, but behind the banners and trophies, his dynasty was falling apart. The war started in the front office. Bulls GM Jerry Krause had grown bitter in the shadow of his own empire. His feud with coach Phil Jackson exploded. Krause told him flat out, "I don't care if you go 82-0, this is your last year." That one line changed everything. For Phil, it was the end. For Jordan, it was a promise. He had always said he'd never play for another coach. No Phil meant no Jordan, and suddenly every game in 1997 to 98 felt like a countdown. The last dance had begun, but the drama didn't stop there. Scottie Pippen was furious over his contract. Dennis Rodman was unpredictable. The roster was aging. The dynasty was cracking from the inside out. And still, Jordan refused to bend. He turned the chaos into fuel. Every night, he played like a man who knew the clock was running out, but who also knew he still owned the game. This wasn't just another season. This was the last ride. This is Michael Jordan's 1998 season, explained. Chaos behind the Bulls' final run. The last dance was chaos from the opening tip. Jordan and the Bulls weren't just defending a title. They were fighting their own front office. Every headline was about feuds, contracts, and the breakup that everyone knew was coming. Scottie Pippen made his stand. Furious at being one of the most underpaid stars in the league, he delayed ankle surgery until the season started. His way of telling Krause he wouldn't be pushed around. That decision left Jordan alone to carry Chicago through the first half of the year. Phil Jackson kept the team steady, using the chaos as fuel. He even handed out a handbook before the season with one message on the cover: "The Last Dance." But the drama didn't stay off the court. Cameras were everywhere, capturing every practice, every timeout, every sideline glare. What was supposed to be a dynasty's farewell tour turned into a traveling circus. And no one embodied that chaos more than Dennis Rodman. With Pippen sidelined, Rodman was supposed to be Jordan's co-star. Instead, he vanished in the middle of the season, disappearing on an unapproved trip to Las Vegas. For days, no one knew where he was. Then just as suddenly, he came back and ripped down 20 rebounds like nothing had happened. That was Rodman in a nutshell. Brilliant, unpredictable, and impossible to control. That was the Bulls in 1998. Every scandal threatening to break them, every distraction pulling them apart. And still, Jordan thrived in the spotlight. He wasn't just scoring, he was enforcing order, dragging his team to win after win while chaos swirled around him. This wasn't the same fresh, high-flying Jordan of the 80s. This was the cold, ruthless closer. The one who could turn dysfunction into dominance. The more the walls closed in, the sharper his focus became. The last dance was just getting started, and soon Jordan would face the biggest test of his leadership yet. When Pippen left Jordan alone. For the first time in years, Michael Jordan didn't have his running mate. Scottie Pippen, the other half of Chicago's dynasty, sat out the first 35 games. His injury was real, but the timing was personal. He was furious at the front office, and he had every reason to be. In 1997 to 98, Pippen was making just $2.8 million. That was the 6th highest salary on the Bulls, and only the 122nd highest in the entire league. Superstars at his level were pulling in $10 million or more a season. Chicago's second best player, maybe the second best player in the world, was being paid like a role player. So Pippen delayed surgery until the season started, making his absence a statement. And that left Jordan on an island. At 34, with an aging roster and constant media pressure, he carried the Bulls night after night. Double teams, triple teams, it didn't matter. He led the league in scoring again, proving he was still the most unstoppable weapon in basketball. But these weren't empty numbers. Every possession was survival. Without Pippen, Chicago stumbled out of the gate. Losses piled up. Questions swirled. Were the Bulls finally cracking? Was this the year the dynasty died? And yet Jordan wouldn't let them collapse. He controlled games with surgical precision. He dictated the pace, punished defenders, and demanded more from everyone around him. When Pippen finally returned in January, Chicago had managed to stay afloat, almost entirely because Jordan refused to break. It was the kind of stretch that showed why he wasn't just the Bulls' leader. He was the league's measuring stick. Even when left underpaid and undersupported, Pippen still mattered. But Jordan proved he could hold the dynasty together alone. And soon he'd remind the world that he had one more MVP season left in him. One last MVP at 35. By the spring of 1998, it was undeniable. Michael Jordan was still the king. At 35 years old, when most stars were fading, he led the league in scoring with 28 points per game, while still pulling down nearly 6 rebounds a night. His jumper was automatic, his footwork flawless, his will unmatched. Every game felt like a masterclass in control. The Bulls finished 62-20, tied for the best record in the league. And while critics pointed to the chaos off the court, the feuds, the age, the drama, Jordan turned it into fuel. He was the constant, the anchor that kept Chicago from falling apart. Voters had no choice. Jordan claimed his 5th MVP, tying Bill Russell for 2nd most in history. It wasn't just about numbers. It was about presence. The league knew that even in year 13, no player commanded fear like Michael Jordan. But the regular season was only a warm-up. The real test was waiting in the playoffs, where every dynasty eventually meets its reckoning. Jordan's toughest Eastern battle. The playoffs were never easy, but in 1998, the East nearly broke the Bulls. The first round against New Jersey was quick, a sweep. The second round against Charlotte was tougher, but Jordan buried his old teammate, B.J. Armstrong, and moved on. Then came the real war, the Indiana Pacers. Reggie Miller and the Pacers weren't intimidated. They pushed Chicago to the edge with a mix of shooting, muscle, and relentless confidence. For the first time in years, it felt like someone could actually dethrone the Bulls before the finals. Game 4 in Indianapolis gave the world a moment. Miller shoving Jordan and drilling a game-winning 3. The Pacers weren't backing down. The series stretched to 7, Game 7 in Chicago. Everything on the line. The Bulls dynasty hanging by a thread. Jordan poured in 28 points and 9 rebounds, and the Bulls leaned on every ounce of championship DNA they had left. Chicago survived, 88-83, barely. It was Jordan's toughest Eastern battle, proof that the dynasty was cracking, but also that his will was still unbreakable. And waiting on the other side was a familiar foe, the finals rematch that would define the end of an era, the rematch that defined a dynasty. The stage was set, Bulls versus Jazz, again. Utah had home court this time. Armed with Karl Malone fresh off his MVP season and John Stockton orchestrating every possession. The Jazz were deeper, hungrier, and desperate for revenge after losing in 1997. But Jordan didn't come alone. Scottie Pippen was battling back problems, grinding through pain. And Dennis Rodman, he was chaos incarnate. One night, he'd grab 14 rebounds and suffocate Malone. The next, he'd vanish, skipping practice in the middle of the finals to wrestle with Hulk Hogan and the NWO on live television. That was Rodman in 1998. Brilliant and unpredictable, a wild card Phil Jackson somehow harnessed into winning basketball. Game 1 in Utah went to the Jazz in overtime. Suddenly, the Bulls were on the ropes, but Jordan responded the only way he knew how, by seizing control. He dropped 37 in Game 2 to even the series, reminding everyone that even in his final act, he was still the best player alive. Back in Chicago, the Bulls' defense suffocated Utah, Pippen flying around, Rodman wreaking havoc, Jordan closing every door. The Bulls ripped off 2 straight wins to take command. By Game 5, the finals were shifting into legend. Jordan, fighting exhaustion, carried Chicago to the brink of another title. The Jazz survived, pushing it back to Utah. And that's where history was waiting. Because in Game 6, Michael Jordan would deliver the most iconic sequence in basketball history. The greatest shot in NBA history, June 14, 1998, Game 6, Utah. The Jazz led late, the crowd roaring, the Bulls dynasty seconds from collapse. And then, Michael Jordan took over. With 21 seconds left, Chicago still trailed by 1. The ball went into Karl Malone's hands. Jordan pounced. He stripped it clean, ripping the ball away like it was destiny. No timeout, no hesitation. This was his moment. He walked it up the floor, every eye in the arena locked on him. Bryon Russell crouched in front, sliding to cut him off. Jordan dribbled right, planted, crossed back left. Russell stumbled, and Jordan rose. The jumper was pure. Swish. The image frozen in time. Jordan's arm extended, his follow-through hanging in the air. 18,000 Jazz fans stunned into silence. That was it. 45 points. The steal, the shot, the pose. Chicago won 87-86. The Bulls were champions again, and Michael Jordan had written the perfect ending. It wasn't just a game winner. It was the greatest shot in NBA history. How the Bulls dynasty was destroyed. The perfect ending should have been the perfect beginning. One more run, one more chance at history, but instead the dynasty was destroyed from the inside. Even as Jordan's shot still echoed around the world, Jerry Krause and Bulls management were already tearing the team apart. Phil Jackson was out, forced into exile despite 6 rings in 8 years. Scottie Pippen, finally healthy, was traded away. Dennis Rodman was waived. Steve Kerr and Luke Longley were gone. And Jordan? He kept his promise. No Phil, no Jordan. In January 1999, during the NBA lockout, he retired for the second time. At the peak of his powers after the ultimate walk-off, the greatest player alive walked away. It wasn't the Jazz or the Pacers or age that ended the dynasty. It was the front office. Pride, ego, and politics ripped apart the greatest team ever assembled. The Bulls' run ended not with a loss, but with a breakup. And just like that, basketball's most dominant empire was gone. It's rare in sports to get the perfect goodbye, but Michael Jordan did it. 6 championships, 6 finals MVPs, 10 scoring titles, and 1 final shot that froze time. In 1998, he walked away on top. Ball in hand, crowd in shock, the world in awe. The last dance wasn't a collapse, it was a curtain call. No fade out, no decline, no doubt. Just the perfect ending. This is Michael Jordan's 1998 season. Explained. And as always, stay legendary.